On April 20th, 1968, Marty Melcher, Terry's stepfather and Doris Day's husband, died after a brief illness. Though Terry and Marty weren't particularly close, Terry shared an unusually intimate bond with his mother. Their relationship had evolved over the years into something resembling siblings rather than parent and child. During their marriage, Doris Day had completely entrusted Marty with all financial decisions. It was a traditional arrangement for the era. She focused on her stellar career, making films and records while he managed the money. As one of Hollywood's brightest stars, Day commanded impressive earnings. She naturally assumed she had accumulated substantial wealth over her decades of success. Following Marty's death, Terry stepped in to help his mother review her financial situation. What they discovered was nothing short of devastating. Terry's investigation revealed a horrifying truth. Marty Melcher and his business partner had systematically depleted every penny of Doris Day's fortune. The situation was even worse than zero. She now faced overwhelming debt and substantial tax liabilities to the IRS. In Hollywood, perception can be everything. The revelation that America's sweetheart was financially ruined could have been catastrophic in multiple ways. If word spread throughout the industry that Doris Day was broke, producers would likely exploit her vulnerability by offering insulting salaries, knowing she desperately needed work. Even more concerning was the potential impact on her carefully crafted public persona. For decades, fans had embraced Doris Day as the quintessential wholesome, perpetually optimistic good girl. If her admirers, the very people who purchased movie tickets and records, discovered this facade didn't match reality, her career could collapse entirely. Terry Melcher immediately launched into crisis mode. He worked relentlessly to salvage whatever remained of his mother's assets while desperately trying to prevent the truth from leaking to the press or industry insiders. This wasn't a quick fix. Resolving the financial disaster would ultimately consume nearly 5 years of his life. Eventually, a judge would award Doris Day almost $23 million in damages from Marty Melcher's investment partner. However, collecting even a fraction of this judgment proved exceedingly difficult. But during the critical period of late 1968 and early 1969, Terry Melcher's sole focus was protecting his mother's remaining property from creditors. Just before Christmas, he and his girlfriend Candace Bergen made a significant decision. They vacated their rental home on Cielo Drive and relocated to a beach house owned by Doris Day. While they informed close friends about their new address, people like Greg Jacobson, Dennis Wilson, and Rudy Altobelli, they generally attempted to keep the move under the radar. Melcher essentially disappeared from the social scene. When not working at Columbia Records Studios with artists from his roster, he was consumed with untangling his mother's complicated financial affairs. Much to Manson's growing frustration, Terry no longer appeared at the industry parties where Charlie had previously sought him out. Even though mutual friends like Jacobson and Wilson respected Melcher's privacy, they would occasionally reassure Manson that they'd mentioned to Terry that Charlie was eager to connect. But despite Manson's relentless efforts to establish contact, Melcher had withdrawn from his previous social circles. His world now revolved entirely around accountants and attorneys as he fought to salvage his mother's financial future. This critical detail, a simple change of address motivated by a family financial crisis, would become one of the most consequential real estate moves in criminal history. When Terry Melcher and Candace Bergen vacated the main house at Cielo Drive, the property's owner, Rudy Altobelli, faced a landlord's universal concern. He didn't want his premium rental sitting empty for long. The arrangement had been ideal. Altobelli lived in the smaller guest cottage while collecting substantial rent from the main residence. Immediately after Melcher and Bergen's departure, Altobelli had his sights set on tenants who could afford his asking price of $1,200 monthly, a considerable sum in 1969. He began actively networking, letting industry contacts know that this exclusive property was available. The Hilltop Sanctuary offered two things that were priceless in Los Angeles: gated privacy and an unobstructed, breathtaking view of the city below. Altobelli had specific requirements for his next tenants. Ideally, they would be connected to the entertainment industry and, crucially, would be comfortable with Altobelli himself continuing to occupy the guest cottage on the property. He wouldn't have to wait long before the perfect candidates expressed interest. By June 1968, Roman Polanski had firmly established himself as Hollywood royalty. His psychological horror film, Rosemary's Baby, had become a massive commercial and critical success, transforming the Polish director into an American celebrity virtually overnight. His wife, Sharon Tate, whom he had married in January of that same year, was on a different trajectory in her career. Though strikingly beautiful, Tate hadn't yet achieved stardom. Her resume included a supporting role in the melodramatic Valley of the Dolls, an appearance in her husband's film Fearless Vampire Killers, and a nude pictorial in Playboy magazine, photographed by Polanski himself. In industry circles, she was viewed as the archetypal Hollywood starlet, extraordinarily attractive but not yet recognized for any particular acting prowess. Typically cast as visual enhancement alongside more established performers. With Rosemary's Baby cementing Polanski's status as a major directorial talent, the couple needed a permanent Los Angeles residence, even though their work frequently took them to England and continental Europe. Finding suitable accommodations had proven challenging. They'd temporarily settled at Chateau Marmont in a Sunset Boulevard apartment, then rented actress Patty Duke's house in the Hollywood Hills. Neither location felt right. The couple sought a residence that reflected Polanski's newly elevated position in the industry. Something grand, impressive, a physical manifestation of having made it in Hollywood. Throughout this period of housing uncertainty, they hired a housekeeper named Winifred Chapman, anticipating more settled domestic arrangements. Despite her glamorous public image and provocative modeling work, Sharon Tate reportedly harbored traditional aspirations for home and family. When news of Altobelli's available property reached them, Polanski and Tate were immediately intrigued. Their house hunting had gained sudden urgency. Sharon had discovered she was pregnant. On February 12, 1969, she placed a call to the property's previous tenant, Terry Melcher, inquiring about his experience living at Cielo Drive. Melcher enthusiastically endorsed the residence. Armed with this positive review, Polanski contacted Altobelli directly. Negotiations progressed rapidly, and just 3 days later, on February 15th, the couple moved in. They were instantly enamored with the property, recognizing that its spacious layout and picturesque setting would impress their extensive social circle. Both Polanski and Tate were known for their hospitality, regularly hosting parties and welcoming both overnight visitors and extended house guests. As originally planned, Altobelli maintained residence in the guest cottage. This arrangement benefited everyone involved. Given the couple's frequent professional travel, having the property owner on site provided security and peace of mind. Altobelli acknowledged that his own schedule sometimes required travel as well, but he promised that during any overlapping absences, he would arrange for a responsible caretaker to temporarily occupy the cottage. America was on edge in May 1969. Tension crackled across the country. The first moon landing was set for late July, but an ominous sense of foreboding lingered, as if the trauma of 1968 had only been a prelude to something worse. President Nixon, preoccupied with Vietnam and international tensions, had little patience for hippies and student radicals, seeing no meaningful difference between them. He also lacked empathy for frustrated black rioters. Though not overtly antagonistic toward minorities and a supporter of government programs to aid them, he fundamentally viewed black Americans as inferior. To his staff, he once explained, "The key is to devise a system that recognizes this while appearing not to." As summer approached, riots erupted in city ghettos, and young white radicals shifted from studying peaceful protest tactics to poring over blueprints for homemade bombs. Signs of impending chaos were everywhere, but Charles Manson ignored them. At Spawn Ranch, preparations for HelterSkelter were set aside yet again. Terry Melcher was coming. Charlie's fury, when Melcher stood him up in March, had given way to desperation to impress him now in May. Even his most devoted followers could see that nothing mattered more to their leader than securing a record deal. On May 18th, as he awaited Melcher's arrival, the keenest observers among the family noticed something unusual. Charlie was nervous. Melcher arrived at Spahn Ranch ready to get down to business. His time was limited. He wasn't interested in pleasantries or indulging the girls. Charlie seized the moment. Melcher agreed to listen to his music. Fetching his guitar, Charlie launched into his performance as the women stripped, humming and providing percussion with tambourines and wooden clappers. They danced in the dusty sunshine, swaying to his songs. Charlie poured everything he had into the audition, and Terry listened intently. During a break, Charlie attempted to engage Melcher in a philosophical discussion about living without restrictions and thriving off society's discarded scraps. But Melcher wasn't interested. He was here for the music, not the family's ideology. Charlie resumed playing, and when he finished, he waited for the moment he had dreamed of, a contract offer. Instead, Melcher remained non-committal. He acknowledged that some of the songs were interesting and mentioned a friend, session guitarist Mike Deasy, who had a mobile recording setup and might be intrigued. Melcher promised to return with Deasy and, as a parting gesture, handed Charlie $50, the only cash he had on him, to help with ranch expenses. As soon as Melcher left, the family gathered around Charlie. Had he landed the record deal? Charlie faced a dilemma. Even at his most self-delusional, he couldn't ignore the fact that Melcher had all but passed. But Charlie couldn't admit failure, not to himself and certainly not to his followers. So he spun the story. Melcher had given him money, surely a signing bonus, and he was returning soon with a recording van. In fact, Charlie had turned down an immediate contract because he didn't believe in written agreements. His word was his bond. The deception worked. To the family, the audition had been a resounding success. How could it be otherwise? Charlie was infallible. In reality, Melcher had left convinced that Manson had no musical talent. Later, he would recall that Charlie's songs were below average nothing. He saw Manson as just another struggling hippie musician, lost in the sea of hopefuls crowding Sunset Boulevard, all singing about the same themes of peace and revolution. Still, he kept his word and arranged for Deasy to visit Spahn Ranch on June 6th. Charlie spent the next 3 weeks ramping up preparations for HelterSkelter while stoking excitement over his impending stardom. Though he warned about the coming race war, most of the family fixated on the possibility of a lavish rock star lifestyle. Life at Dennis Wilson's mansion had been a taste of something better, and if Charlie made it big, they'd never have to return to the desolation of Barker Ranch. On June 6th, Melcher, Deasy, and Greg Jacobson arrived at Spahn. Charlie performed again, with the women providing background vocals and percussion. But in a disastrously misguided attempt at hospitality, someone slipped Deasy LSD. He suffered a terrifying bad trip, and Melcher and Jacobson had to escort him home. As they left, Charlie followed, desperately trying to salvage the opportunity. Then, out of nowhere, Randy Starr, a veteran stuntman who frequented the ranch, appeared, drunkenly waving an old six-shooter. To Melcher, the scene was almost comical, but Charlie saw his dream slipping away. Enraged, he screamed, "Don't draw on me, motherfucker!" and in front of his stunned guests, brutally beat Starr. A few days later, Charlie got the response he had been dreading. Whether in person or over the phone, Melcher let him down gently with the classic producer's rejection, "You're good, but I wouldn't know what to do with you." With that, Charlie's dreams of rock stardom were effectively over. For gurus like Manson, failure is dangerous. They must continuously produce miracles or risk losing their followers. Charlie had made the family part of his quest for a record deal, and it had come to nothing. If they doubted him now, how long before they questioned HelterSkelter? They had expected him to be signing with Columbia Records any day now. Charlie needed to reframe the situation, and fast. He concocted a new narrative. Terry Melcher, he told his followers, had promised him a contract, but then betrayed him. Didn't everyone remember Melcher giving him money? That had been a down payment, and hadn't Melcher assured Charlie he would call soon? But instead, he had turned his back on the music that could heal the world. Just as Jesus was betrayed, so too was Charlie. It was yet another sign that the prophecies of Revelation in the White Album were unfolding. HelterSkelter was coming down fast. The family believed him. They had no choice. They had surrendered their lives to him. But they sensed a shift in their leader. Before, Charlie had balanced his inner rage with moments of calm. Now, he was angry all the time. Charlie knew Melcher had been his last real shot at a record deal, but he wasn't ready to quit just yet. That summer, he made a few last-ditch attempts to find a patron. Bobby Beausoleil pitched his music to Frank Zappa. Gypsy played his recordings for Paul Rothchild, the producer of The Doors. Charlie even performed for Mamas and Papas singer Cass Elliot. They all passed. With each rejection, his frustration deepened. After this short break, you'll hear about the Manson family creepy crawls. Charlie's followers were engaged in a systematic campaign of home invasions that served as both training grounds and psychological conditioning for more violent acts to come. The creepy crawl was exactly what its unsettling name suggests, a silent, predatory invasion of occupied homes while the residents slept, completely unaware of the intruders moving through their personal spaces. These weren't traditional burglaries, though items were occasionally taken. The primary purpose was far more disturbing. The creepy crawl missions began in the summer of 1969. Under cover of darkness, typically after midnight, small groups of family members, usually including at least one male for protection, would target affluent neighborhoods in the Los Angeles area. Dressed entirely in black, they would methodically approach houses where the occupants appeared to be asleep. Using skills developed through repeated practice, they would locate unlocked doors or windows, surprisingly common in the late 1960s, even in wealthy areas, and silently enter the homes. Once inside, the family members would move with painstaking care, walking heel to toe to minimize sound, sometimes even crawling on all fours across carpeted floors. They communicated through hand signals and whispers, navigating through strangers' homes while the residents slept just rooms away. What makes these invasions particularly disturbing is that theft wasn't the primary objective. While they occasionally took money or small valuables, what they called getting the goods, the real purpose was psychological and preparatory. According to multiple family members who later testified or gave interviews, Manson instructed them to rearrange furniture slightly, move personal items to different locations, or leave subtle signs of intrusion. Imagine waking up to find your furniture shifted, your prized possessions in different places, yet nothing obviously stolen. The psychological impact of knowing someone had invaded your home while you slept would be devastating. The most chilling aspect of these creepy crawls was their purpose. Charles Manson had multiple motivations for sending his followers on these nighttime missions. First, they served as training exercises, teaching family members how to enter homes undetected and move silently through occupied spaces. Second, they functioned as psychological conditioning, gradually desensitizing his followers to breaking society's most basic taboos. With each successful invasion, the line between unthinkable and doable blurred further. For young people already isolated from mainstream society and heavily using psychedelic drugs, these experiences further eroded normal moral boundaries. Third, these missions reinforced the power dynamics within the family. Participants would return to Spawn Ranch exhilarated by their successful missions, strengthening their commitment to both Manson and the group's increasingly apocalyptic ideology. Most disturbing of all, the residents whose homes were invaded likely never knew they had been targeted. Many probably attributed missing items to their own forgetfulness or dismissed subtle changes in their homes as imagination. A few might have realized something was amiss, but finding nothing obviously stolen may have never reported the intrusions. In his twisted vision, Manson saw these activities as preparation for HelterSkelter, his apocalyptic race war fantasy. The creepy crawls were gradually escalating in boldness and frequency throughout the summer of 1969. The creepy crawls represent one of the most disturbing examples of how Manson systematically broke down his followers' inhibitions against violating others. On Charlie's orders, they began stealing more during their creepy crawls, prioritizing items they could trade, sell, or use, especially credit cards. Charlie's rhetoric grew more violent. Why not escalate the creepy crawls? Maybe they should start tying people up, terrifying them. Maybe some piggies needed to die. Piggies or pigs was the term they used to describe the white establishment elite. Death, he preached, was nothing to fear. Life and death were the same. He began asking his followers a chilling question. Would you die for me? Under his influence, both psychological and chemical, they assured him they would. But cracks were forming. Some wanted out. Pat Krenwinkel ran off with a biker, only for Charlie to track her down. Awestruck by his ability to find her, she returned willingly, convinced of his supernatural powers. Charlie couldn't prevent every defection, especially among those he had sent ahead to Death Valley while he remained at Spawn Ranch. Word reached him that Brooks Poston had left Barker Ranch to work with prospector and rival guru Paul Crockett, and that Juanita had also deserted, marrying one of Crockett's partners. Charlie needed an uprising, something he could present to his followers as the beginning of HelterSkelter, so they believed they had no option but to stay. But the blacks weren't cooperating. He told Paul Watkins that any delay was due to black people being too stupid to know how to start HelterSkelter. It was going to happen that summer, Charlie declared, and if necessary, he would be the one to show them how. That was too much for Watkins. The next time Charlie sent him to Barker Ranch to check on things, Watkins defected to Paul Crockett as well. Charlie had lost his most effective recruiter. Determined to keep the rest of the family together, he planned to move them to Death Valley, where they would be even more dependent on him. Of course, Crockett was out there, but Charlie had plans for him. Then the family suffered another loss, this time through arrest. Spawn ranch hand turned family member Steve Clem Grogan, also known as Scramblehead, was jailed for child molestation and indecent exposure. He explained to police, "The kids wanted me to, the thing fell out of my pants and the parents got excited." Despite his reputation as the dumbest family member, Clem was useful to Charlie, so long as the tasks weren't too complicated. Now he was gone. With no chance of securing a record deal through LA contacts, family members wondering when HelterSkelter would begin, and Paul Crockett poaching his followers from Barker Ranch, Charlie was desperate to leave. But money was an issue. Without it, they couldn't survive long in the desert. Drug deals were the fastest way to get cash, and Charlie decided to work another contact besides the straight Satan's bikers. Luella, Tex Watson's former girlfriend from his AWOL months, was still dealing. On July 1st, Tex called her, claiming he had 25 kilos of high-quality weed. Luella agreed to bring in a buyer who would front $2,500, skim a few kilos for herself, and make a nice profit. What Tex didn't tell her was that the 25 kilos didn't exist. He planned to take the money and burn Luella and her buyer. If they traced Tex back to Spawn, Charlie would swear Tex had disappeared weeks earlier. Everything went wrong. Luella's buyer was a large, imposing black dealer named Bernard Crow, known as Lotsa Papa. Tex got the $2,500 up front, but Lotsa Papa and his crew kept Luella as collateral, warning Tex in graphic detail what would happen to her if they were ripped off. Tex swore he was on the level, then took the money to Charlie at Spawn. Soon, Lotsa Papa realized he'd been scammed. He called the ranch, demanding Tex. Charlie stuck to the script, claiming Tex was gone and unreachable. But Lotsa Papa escalated the threat. He claimed to be a Black Panther and promised to return with an army to kill everyone at Spawn Ranch if he didn't get his money or his weed. Charlie took this threat seriously. In prison, he had been intimidated by black Muslims, and since his time in Berkeley, he believed the Black Panthers were deadly to anyone who crossed them. His HelterSkelter prophecy relied on black militants spreading chaos among whites. In reality, by the summer of 1969, the Black Panther Party was fractured and in no position to launch an attack on Spawn Ranch. Lotsa Papa wasn't even a member, but Charlie believed him. He needed the money, and he couldn't let the family see him back down. Certain he was cornered, Charlie told Lotsa Papa he would meet him at his apartment in North Hollywood. Taking family member T.J. Walleman with him, Charlie explained the plan on the way. he would tuck a handgun in the back of his pants, and once inside, Walleman would pull it out and shoot lots of papa on Charlie's signal. As usual, Charlie wanted someone else to do the dirty work. Lots of papa had 2 associates with him. Walleman lost his nerve, forcing Charlie to pull the trigger himself. According to Walleman, the gun misfired at first, but then Charlie shot Lots of Papa in the chest. The man collapsed. Charlie waved the gun at the others and fled with Walleman back to Spawn. Furious at Walleman for panicking, Charlie bragged to the family that he had killed a Black Panther. But he remained terrified of retaliation. Convinced a Panther hit squad was coming for them, he armed family members, placed bikers on lookout duty, and ordered constant surveillance of the ranch. Every black visitor was treated with suspicion. When a bus full of black passengers passed by the front gate, Charlie pointed it out as proof that the Panthers were scouting them. He wanted HelterSkelter to begin with a black attack on whites, but not on him. He used the Lots of Papa shooting to convince the family that the race war was imminent. They needed to raise money and flee to the desert before they got caught in the crossfire. Meanwhile, the armed guards stayed on watch. As former family member Gypsy later put it wasn't peace and love and hippies anymore. It was almost like an army. But the family needed reinforcements. With recent defections and Clem's arrest, Charlie relied on Gypsy to recruit. Days after the shooting, she found a promising candidate. Linda Kasabian had just arrived in Topanga Canyon. In 1968, she and her husband Bob had lived in a New Mexico commune before their marriage fell apart. Linda took their infant daughter to her mother's home in New Hampshire while Bob drifted to Southern California. By mid-June 1969, he reached out, inviting Linda to reconcile. She and her daughter Tanya joined him in Topanga Canyon, where he lived with a hippie philanthropist named Charlie Melton. Bob had a grand plan. He and Melton were going to South America, buy a boat, and sail around the world. Linda wasn't sure she wanted that. The reconciliation wasn't going well. It felt like nothing had changed, and she didn't want to be stuck on a boat with Bob. She also didn't want to return to New Hampshire. Then Gypsy showed up, visiting Melton as a friend. She and Linda talked, and Gypsy introduced her to the idea of the family, a place where Linda and Tanya would be loved and cared for. She invited Linda to visit Spawn Ranch. Linda accepted, and once there, she quickly connected with Tex Watson. They spent the night together, and Tex encouraged her to steal money from Melton before coming back to stay. Linda was hesitant but wanted to impress the family. She took $5,000 and, with Tanya in tow, brought the money to Spawn. Only then did she meet Charlie Manson. He took the money, checked out Linda's legs, and learned she had a valid driver's license. That was enough. She and her daughter could stay. Tanya was sent off with the other family children. Some family members found Linda cold and unlikable, but Charlie wanted her there, and that was all that mattered. Then on July 19th, Clem stunned everyone by returning. Sent to Camarillo State Hospital for psychiatric evaluation, he had simply walked away and rejoined the family. The next day, the world watched as Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon. At Spawn Ranch, the family dismissed it as fake. Nothing was real unless Charlie said so. And Charlie wasn't thinking about the moon. He was thinking about money. It was time to force his so-called friends to prove their loyalty by giving him cash. If they refused, he would take it. Charles Manson was growing increasingly paranoid and desperate. One of his primary meal tickets was slipping away. Beach Boy Dennis Wilson had become Manson's obsession. After months of parasitic living in Wilson's mansion, the relationship had soured. Wilson was trying to distance himself, but Charlie wasn't having it. Manson pursued Wilson relentlessly. When he couldn't find the drummer in person, he left ominous messages. At one temporary residence, Wilson discovered a chilling note. "You can't get away from me." The threat was unmistakable. Another time, and this detail still sends shivers down my spine, Charlie left just a single bullet. No note necessary. The message was crystal clear, and Wilson understood exactly what it meant. But by late July, Wilson had become too elusive, constantly moving, surrounded by friends and bandmates who were increasingly aware of Manson's dangerous influence. Charlie needed to shift his attention, and his predatory instincts elsewhere. Enter Gary Hinman. Hinman seemed the perfect target. A music teacher who supplemented his income dealing drugs, Hinman had accumulated modest assets, 2 cars and enough savings to be planning a trip to Japan. In Manson's eyes, this meant Hinman had resources that rightfully belonged to the family. In Charlie's twisted philosophy, Hinman faced a binary choice: join the family, surrendering all possessions and bank accounts to Manson, or hand over whatever cash he had available. There was no third option. Bobby Beausoleil provided the perfect pretext for confrontation. Beausoleil had recently acted as a middleman in a drug deal gone wrong. He'd paid Hinman $1,000, money that came from a motorcycle gang called the Straight Satans, for what was supposed to be 1,000 tabs of mescaline for a planned party. After sampling the drugs, the bikers claimed the batch was contaminated. These weren't men you wanted to disappoint. The Straight Satans were furious, demanding Beausoleil return their money. Manson saw opportunity in this crisis. He convinced Beausoleil that any confrontation with Hinman should extract not just the Satan's $1,000, but additional funds to finance the family's impending HelterSkelter desert escape. At minimum, Hinman's 2 cars would fetch something on the market. It's important to understand that Bobby Beausoleil occupied a unique position in this deadly constellation. He was never fully integrated into the family. Instead, he and Charlie maintained a friendship of convenience, their interests occasionally aligning like dark stars. Both men had pressing reasons to appease the Straight Satans. Beausoleil feared physical retribution if he couldn't refund their drug money. Manson, meanwhile, valued the bikers as muscle, his frontline defense should the Black Panthers attack Spawn Ranch, a persistent paranoid fantasy in Charlie's deteriorating mental state. Beausoleil had zero interest in following Manson to Death Valley. The apocalyptic HelterSkelter vision belonged to Charlie alone. Yet Bobby saw no harm in helping finance Manson's desert exodus by extracting money from Hinman. It was, in his mind, just another hustle. Friday, July 25th marked the beginning of the end for Gary Hinman. That afternoon, longtime family member Bruce Davis drove Bobby, Mary Brunner, and Susan Atkins to Hinman's residence. This wasn't a social call. Beausoleil came armed with both a knife and a handgun, tools of intimidation that would soon become instruments of something far worse. After Hinman welcomed them inside, his final act of hospitality, Beausoleil immediately demanded his $1,000 back. Hinman, genuinely confused, insisted there must be some misunderstanding. The drugs he'd sold were fine, he claimed. There was nothing wrong with the mescaline. Unmoved, Beausoleil instructed Susan Atkins to hold Hinman at gunpoint while he searched the house for valuables worth $1,000. If Hinman wouldn't provide cash, perhaps the Satans would accept merchandise as compensation. In a desperate bid for survival, Hinman attempted to grab the gun from Susan's inexperienced hands. Beausoleil leapt to her defense, and in the ensuing struggle the gun discharged. The bullet missed everyone, embedding itself beneath the kitchen sink, a mute witness to the escalating violence. Beausoleil, significantly stronger than the slight music teacher, quickly subdued Hinman. What followed was brutal. Beausoleil beat him repeatedly, demanding all available cash. Hinman insisted he had none, his pleas falling on deaf ears. Eventually, broken and terrified, Hinman reluctantly agreed to sign over the pink slips to both his vehicles, a Volkswagen bus and a Fiat station wagon. Together, they were worth more than the $1,000 in dispute. For Hinman, it surely seemed a small price to pay to end this nightmare. He couldn't have known that this was just the beginning. What Gary Hinman didn't realize as he signed away his vehicles was that he had just witnessed something profoundly dangerous, the family's first taste of successful violent coercion. A threshold had been crossed, and in the coming days his situation would deteriorate from frightening to fatal. After the break, we'll explore how this hostage situation evolved into the Manson family's first murder, setting the template for the horrific violence that would shock the nation just days later. Beausoleil was satisfied on his own behalf, but Charlie's financial needs still had to be considered. He called Charlie at Spawn Ranch, explaining that even after a severe beating, Hinman continued to deny having any money. Charlie was certain Hinman did and wanted it. Just before midnight, Bruce Davis drove Charlie to Hinman's house. Charlie brought his sword, and when Hinman protested that he didn't understand what was happening, that he had always been a friend to the family, Charlie slashed the blade along the left side of Hinman's head, nearly splitting his ear in half. Charlie snarled that he expected Hinman to give Beausoleil everything he had. Then he and Bruce returned to Spawn. For the rest of that night, all of Saturday, and well into Sunday, Beausoleil continued to beat Hinman while Susan and Mary pleaded with him to hand over his money and end his suffering. Hinman still insisted he had nothing to give. Beausoleil repeatedly called Charlie at Spawn with reports of no progress. At one point, Hinman threatened to go to the police once Bobby and the two women finally left. That was something Charlie couldn't allow. If Hinman talked to the police about his drug deals with the family and Charlie was arrested, any investigation might uncover his murder of Lotsapapa. As a multi-time offender on probation, Charlie knew he would be facing a maximum sentence. During a final Sunday phone call, Beausoleil told Charlie he's got his ear hacked off and he'll go to the police. Charlie replied, "You know what to do." Hinman had to die, and if he did, his murder might as well advance Charlie's prophecy of HelterSkelter. The Black Panthers were much on Charlie's mind after his confrontation with Lotsapapa. He decided to frame them by telling Beausoleil to leave evidence implicating them. The Panthers' symbol was a paw print. Bobby stabbed Hinman several times, and as he lay dying, he dipped his hand in Hinman's blood and pressed a crude paw print onto the wall. Then, using a glove-covered finger dipped in the pooling blood, he wrote "Political Piggy" near the print. Beausoleil, Susan, and Mary tried to wipe away all their fingerprints, but missed a few. They stole a set of Hinman's bagpipes, then drove his Fiat and Volkswagen bus back to Spawn, waiting for news stories about how the Black Panthers had viciously murdered a white man in his home. 2 days passed, and no reports emerged. Beausoleil returned to Hinman's house to see if the murder had been discovered. It hadn't. Later, back at Spawn, he remarked on the eerie sound of maggots eating away on Hinman's corpse. Worried the bloody paw print could be traced back to him, he tried to scrub it off, but the blood had dried solid. He also made a second attempt to wipe down surfaces for fingerprints, but once again did a sloppy job. Careless with the murder weapon, he stashed the bloody knife in the tire well of Hinman's Fiat and kept the car for himself. Charlie, perhaps to cover the $1,000 debt, disposed of the Volkswagen bus, possibly giving it to the Straight Satans. Charlie wanted the details of Hinman's murder kept secret from the rest of the family, but that proved impossible. Beausoleil wanted to brag. There was competition between him and Charlie. Charlie had earned bragging rights from shooting Lotsapapa, and now Bobby had his own proof that he was a tough guy. He told Straight Satan Danny DiCarlo, who passed the details to Tex Watson. Susan, unable to resist boasting, told the other women. When one asked what it was like, she replied, "It was real weird and he made funny noises." Yeller, disgusted by Susan's remarks, decided to flee Spawn with a male family member named Bill. Before they left, they asked Pat Krenwinkel to come with them. Remembering how easily Charlie had tracked her the last time she left, Pat refused. But Charlie still lost 2 more followers. Kitty Lou Tessinger, Bobby Beausoleil's pregnant girlfriend, was also disturbed by what Susan had said and begged Bobby to take her away. He refused. On Thursday, July 31st, some of Gary Hinman's friends visited his house. They received no response when they knocked and noticed clouds of flies buzzing through an open window. Concerned, they contacted the police. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department had jurisdiction over Topanga Canyon. Officers Paul Whiteley and Charles Ginther investigated, found Hinman's body, and spent the next several days collecting evidence. The bloody paw print and writing on the wall were grotesque. But what interested the investigators more was a clean fingerprint lifted from the crime scene. Hinman's friends told the officers that both of his cars were missing. Whiteley and Ginther issued an all-points bulletin for the Fiat and Volkswagen. Meanwhile, Charlie was growing restless. Summer was waning, and HelterSkelter had yet to begin. The family's efforts to amass enough money to relocate to Barker Ranch had failed. The Black Panthers could attack at any moment. 2 murders, Lotsapapa and Hinman, could still be traced back to Spahn Ranch. Worse yet, ranch hand Shorty Shea kept offering to run the family off if George Spahn gave the word. Charlie needed to clear his head. He announced he would drive north to recruit new family members. Before leaving, he ordered everyone to stay on high alert for a Black Panther attack and continue preparations for their move to Death Valley. On August 3rd, Charlie left Spahn in a 1952 Ford delivery van, using a stolen gas credit card along the way. Stopping for gas near Big Sur, he met 17-year-old Stephanie Schramm, a hitchhiker traveling from San Francisco to San Diego. Charlie turned on the charm, telling her everything she wanted to hear. Schramm, seeking an escape, fell for it. Charlie promised to eventually take her to San Diego, and she eagerly joined him. They took LSD and had sex. On August 6th, they returned to Spahn for dinner. Schramm was put off by Charlie's followers, especially the women. Like Patricia Krenwinkel before her, she had believed Charlie would be her exclusive boyfriend. When she realized she had to share him, she hesitated. Charlie reassured her, promising he would be hers alone, for a while. The next morning, he drove her to San Diego to collect her belongings. At the same time, Beausoleil, still in Hinman's Fiat, was caught near San Luis Obispo when the car broke down. 2 highway patrolmen running a routine check found the APB on the vehicle and arrested him. In the Fiat's tire well, they discovered the bloody murder weapon. When L.A. detectives Whiteley and Genther interrogated Bobby, he first claimed he had bought the car from a black man, hoping the fabricated Black Panther connection would help him. When the officers matched his thumbprint to one left at the crime scene, he changed his story, claiming he and 2 unidentified women had found Hinman wounded and tried to help. Detectives didn't believe him. Beausoleil was transferred to L.A. County Jail and charged with murder. At Spahn Ranch, the family anxiously awaited Charlie's return. They needed his guidance, but he was still on the road, setting events in motion that would soon spiral out of control. On their way to pick up Stephanie Schramm's clothes from her sister's house in San Diego, she and Charlie were pulled over by a highway patrolman for an unspecified mechanical violation. The officer asked to see Charlie's driver's license, and Charlie had to admit he didn't have one. He was issued a ticket at 6:15 p.m. on August 7th for operating a vehicle without a license, and signed the carbon with his real name rather than an alias. Charles Manson and Stephanie Schramm returned, only to be met with bad news. Bobby Beausoleil had been arrested. Bobby's brief call to the ranch from jail was meant to reassure Charlie that he was keeping quiet, but the unspoken message was clear. If Charlie didn't get him out, Bobby might start talking. He knew too much, not just about the murder of Gary Hinman, but also the shooting of Bernard Lotsapapa Crow. The family was desperate to free Beausoleil, but no one more so than Charlie. He had to act fast. Bobby was not a patient man. Even though he had never officially joined the family, Beausoleil was still one of them. Everyone knew something about the Hinman murder, though only Susan and Mary Brunner, who had been there, knew what had happened. Death was the same as life. No action was wrong, and so there was little concern for Hinman. Instead, the focus was how to free their friend. Someone remembered seeing a movie about copycat murders and a killer subsequently being freed from jail. Maybe they could do something like that. This was only one suggestion in a meandering group discussion. Charlie would know what to do. Manson wrestled with a choice, run or fight. If Beausoleil turned on him, Charlie needed to disappear, maybe head to the Northwest, Chicago, or Indianapolis, places he had been before. With the dream of a record deal dead, there was little reason to stay in L.A. He could start over somewhere new, recruit fresh followers. After all, people were always searching for someone to believe in. But he had spent years molding the family, carefully selecting and shaping them into loyal disciples. They still believed he was Jesus, still hung on his every word. He tested their devotion, floating the idea of leaving them behind. As expected, they begged him to stay. They were in this together and willing to do whatever it took. Ideas flew. breaking Beausoleil out of jail, staging attacks. Someone suggested a copycat murder. That stuck with Charlie. The bloodied paw print and the words "political piggy" scrawled at the Hinman crime scene had been meant to frame the Black Panthers, triggering a race war, HelterSkelter. But Hinman wasn't high profile enough. If they were going to make an impact, the victims needed to be more prominent. And if that also helped get Beausoleil out of jail, even better. Charlie instructed Lynette Squeaky Fromm to give Mary Brunner and Sandra Good some stolen credit cards and send them into town to pick up supplies. Then he gathered the family and delivered a chilling pronouncement: "Now is the time for HelterSkelter." Now is the time for me to hand you over to our two crime experts, Simon and Tom, after this quick break.
Alex, thank you very much again. Fantastic. Really enjoying this. And you know, what you're doing is comprehensive antecedents. My first job on a murder squad, I was the antecedents officer. And the antecedents officer has to build up a picture of the deceased and write a life story, obviously a very abbreviated life story of the deceased. And it's incredible how important it is. And just, Alec, for your information, it's tragic and it's funny, but the first murder I was on was a man involved in a fight. He had been killed at a bus stop in the east of Edinburgh and left lying dead. I was the antecedents officer, so I was tasked with finding all about how he'd lived his life, and I'm not going to name him, and you'll understand the reasons why in a second. I did a comprehensive review of his life and found out that the only thing he had done of any note in his life was get murdered. Honestly, this guy, his family hated him. He was dishonest. He was an obnoxious drunk, which led to his death. He'd been sacked from his job for dishonesty. The neighbours hated him. He was antisocial. He lived off his old mother until she eventually died. Honestly, there was nothing worthwhile that I could find about his life. And the only thing that was notable, tragically, the only people that had paid him any attention were the people investigating his murder. It's a very sad story to tell, but Simon, did you ever get involved in that? Because I found that what our older DCIs used to do was give the new boys the antecedents job, because it was an important piece of work. Yeah. And it tested them, and you had to write a summary, but sometimes in the antecedents of the deceased lay a clue to the crime. Yeah. So it was important as well. And I think what Alex is doing here is doing a magnificent antecedent report.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In all our police reports, Tom, I can only think that the reports that you and I and our colleagues sent to the Fiscal were broadly the same. There was a pro forma, and antecedent history was a big part of that for the accused. And that was great crime intelligence filtered into criminal intelligence for future reference. But it's the same with the deceased. Yeah, we always had, there was always two on it. And it was a good job to get. It was a very interesting job. And you knew how important it was, because very often the clues to relationships and how the murder had come about, or whatever it was, had come about late in the history of relationships and partnerships, family members, previous convictions, all of that can lie in the background there. So it was very interesting, and I agree with you 100%. It's exactly what Alex is doing here with this case. And that's why it's so fascinating, because we're getting to the bits that nobody's went to before.
Yeah, absolutely.
The focus has always been on the drama, hasn't it? Episode 8 starts with the death of the husband of Doris Day. So immediately you're bringing in one of the biggest stars of the day in America. So immediately you're distracted with the Beatles, some of the stars mentioned in all the episodes. But what we're doing is looking behind that, the headlines, what was actually going on in the lives of these people as they were moving through their story.
Yeah, I felt awful sorry for Doris. I didn't actually know that about Doris Day. What a shame. Because Doris Day was the perfect, squeaky clean girl next door. The bonny, blonde, vivacious girl in all these films way back. And I'm really sorry that she ended up broke, having been fleeced by her husband. What a shame.
Yeah. It was quite common back then, wasn't it? Females didn't have the same autonomy that they have now, of course, Tom. It was a different world that we were living in. Thankfully, we've moved on from it. But especially child stars, too, they were taken advantage of greatly during the stardom and abused, really.
Yeah,
abused.
Absolutely. But what was interesting for me is I'm interested in tipping points. I'm interested in where things start to go wrong, where we start to see the breakdown. And I think the failure and the rejection of Charlie from his recording ambitions, the failure of the recording sessions that he did, I think that was a tipping point. That was the end of a dream for Charlie.
Yes.
It really was.
Yeah. And the betrayal, as he saw it,
Yes.
with Wilson stealing his song that he thought was going to be the breakthrough song and all the rest of it, changing the name of it, using it and never crediting Manson. So you can see all that perfect storm. It's incredible how all these different strands or spokes came together to create what was going to happen.
Absolutely, and drives him from having a logical plan. He wasn't as good a singer or a guitar player as he thought he was. Actually, listening to Charlie singing, and I only heard him recently because we're doing this show, his voice is not that bad. But his guitar playing is pretty discordant. And clearly, it was part of his psyche that he wouldn't take advice. I mean, there was a reference earlier on where he went to sessions to play, and session musicians who were obviously superb professionals tried to give him advice on how to play, and he wouldn't take it. He rejected it. Because Charlie had a God complex, really. He trained these girls and his family to see him as the Messiah.
Yeah.
And he kind of thought that himself.
He believed his own propaganda.
Yeah, exactly. That's a big problem. Start believing your own press releases and you're in trouble.
It's interesting what you're saying about the studio, Tom. I was in a band when I was a young cop, and I was the least of them. There was 5 of us and I played keyboards, but I was very much in the background. The other 4 guys were much more serious musicians than I ever was. And at least 2 of them were very good, the guitarist and the drummer. We went into the studio. We played in a place called McTavish's Kitchen, and it was a big gig for us. We played there once a month. The boss of McTavish said that he wanted us to go into the studio and make a single. We didn't do original music at that point. We were only doing covers. But we wrote a song and went in. The B-side of it was He Ain't Heavy, an old Hollies number. And we only had a day. I think a day in the studio probably cost £200 or something like that. So we only had 8 hours. And we spent the first 4 hours trying to figure out how to use a big mixing desk, how to use the studio to put down different tracks, different instruments. And none of us had done it before. But the engineer in the place must have been fed up watching us, and he came over and said, "What is it you've got? Here's what we'll do." And he just directed us for the next 2 or 3 hours, and we came out with a representable product. But we wouldn't have if it hadn't been for his expertise and patience. I can just see Charlie with his arrogance going in there and not having a clue, because it's a different world. You mentioned in our last episode about boy bands and creating manufactured product for a market. That's what music producers and studios do, and Simon Cowell's still doing it to this day. Yeah. Charlie was never going to be moulded like that. He had his own view. You mustn't change the lyrics. The lyrics are sacrosanct and all that nonsense. Whereas to be successful, you would have to go in and say, "I'll do whatever you tell me. Whatever you say, I'll do it," because you know what you're doing.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, haven't we, on Crime Time Inc., about the Bay City Rollers and Tam Payton and the exploitation of young people, vulnerable people.
Yeah.
Simon, you've just dropped a fact bomb on us, and there's some questions that must arise from that. First, does the recording of you and your band still exist?
Of course.
We want to hear it on Crime Time Inc.
Just listen to the Hollies. They did a version of...
No, I don't think we should listen to the Hollies, Simon. I think we should listen to you. The second thing is, so let's just put these facts together. You were a member of a band, most of which members were slightly more talented than you. Is that right?
A lot more.
A lot more talented. And there was 4 of them?
And me.
And you were the 5th. Okay. Now, let's just conjoin that with the fact that you're a close personal friend of Paul McCartney's.
Maybe that's what got me in.
Simon, Stop the bus. This is incredible. You are the fifth Beatle. Put down your tools. This is a news story. Simon McLean was the fifth Beatle, and had he stayed with the band, they'd have crashed and burned.
You were doing well there too.
I can only keep being nice to you for so long.
I had the title of my new book in my head. I could see your signature on the front of it, saying what a fabulous story, the fifth Beatle.
Yeah,
and then you go and blow it all up like that. Maybe our team could cut it off at the positive bit there.
No. Listen, I'll tell you what. The truth of the matter is, you were right about that, because no matter how talented you are, you do need backup. And this relates to us too, Simon, you and I, because regardless of how talented we are, if our friend Chris was not there behind the desk, nobody would be hearing this right now.
So,
next time we speak, we want to hear the recording of you. What was your band called?
Horizon.
Okay. Well, next time we've got to look over the horizon and hear Simon McLean play. What, were you the bass guitarist?
No, I was keyboards.
Oh, you were keyboards?
The plot thickens. But listen, I don't want to spoil my book. I want to re-release it when my book comes out, Tom. The Fifth Beatle, new release in 2025. I was going to do it sooner, but the Beatles produced a new record last year, so I thought I'd wait until that was done and dusted.
The thing is, Simon, it's a double irony, really, isn't it? Because not only could the whole world of music have been changed for the better, but the whole world of law enforcement could have been changed for the better too when you joined the police.
Can we move on now?
All right.
Back to Charlie, the thing I noticed, there's been slight changes over the episodes, and here we see Charlie starting to get angrier. You summed it up earlier when you said he was starting to lose the one thing he needed to keep this together, control, total control. But he's starting to lose that and getting angrier. They start moving towards crime. It's getting harder to feed themselves, clothe themselves, keep mobile and all the rest of it. He doesn't go breaking into houses, but he starts his family doing that and breaking into homes during the night, but not for profit all the time.
No, that's interesting. The night intrusion thing is very interesting. And of course, the reason he did that was logical. It was to gain control, but also to gain expertise. It was almost like a training exercise, which is interesting. But then a strong thread starts to run through this now. Charlie cannot be seen to fail again. And he must know in his heart of hearts that his main ambition to be a pop star has failed. He's not going to be seen to fail again. But I've got to say, as he starts on the crime spree, you can see that it's amateur night at the movies. The first person they kill is a drug dealer. Now, that's not the first person to kill. Do not kill drug dealers. There's all sorts of consequences arising from that, always. This comes back to my point that he's actually lost the plot a bit. And it's not very clever. The crimes are not clever either, not in terms of the way they're committed and the evidence that's left, etc. And here we have the first question. You're actually wondering now why law enforcement, and we've spoken about jurisdiction a lot, honestly, why law enforcement was not onto this and starting to plot this sooner than it actually was.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting, Tom. There's so much going on, and what we can't do, although Alex has done a great job of taking us back into that era, we can't put ourselves in those circumstances of what else was going on law enforcement-wise at that time. And probably drugs was the big problem they were trying to get a grip of because it was so new and was having such a profound effect on people's lives and splitting families up across the country. It was much more an unknown quantity in those days as well, Tom. We can look at controlled drugs now through the lens of everything we have learned over the last 40 years with interactions with laboratories and the Misuse of Drugs Act and the evolution of drug misuse as well. But that didn't exist then. It was brand new, and mushrooms and all these things. And even the very term, probably hallucinogen, was a new thing as far as the public were concerned. So it was a different environment entirely, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody knew. The other thing that struck me too, with Charlie Manson's family, none of these girls, young men and women in his gang or families, were local. Do you notice that? They were all people who were drifters, in and out, attracted to the bright lights of LA. And I suspect that law enforcement, the LAPD, the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, I suspect they were inundated by people living on the fringes of society. And if you've ever visited that part of the world, there are vast areas of enormous landscape, isolated houses and little ranches and homesteads. You couldn't guess what was going on in some of them. And you certainly couldn't keep a grip of it with this enormous influx of people, many of whom were taking drugs of some sort.
You'd be delighted to know, Tom, that I take this Crime Time Inc. podcast so seriously that I'm going over to do a bit of research myself in September, just like I did in Australia, so that we could see what was going on the ground. We're going over to California to do the same over there and make sure that all this information is 100% for our listeners. That's my motive. That's my real motive. So I'll be away for a month or so, but we'll keep you up to date.
Listen, Simon, the expenses for the Australian trip have not been cleared. I have called in the auditor, and there's some serious questions, so please don't book business class in the hope that you're going to get some X's from Crime Time, because you're not.
There's a committee. I'll go to the committee. You're not the deputy chief. You're not the deputy chief now. You're part of a democracy now, Tom.
No, democracy? Democracy, you say? No. No way.
John, we finished up here. This episode brings us back to HelterSkelter and some of the Beatles stuff. The race war fantasy, really, that was Charlie Manson's. And fantasy is a great word in there, because by now, I suppose at the start, he was maybe 5% fantasist and the rest was happening because they were finding places to stay. The sex was great. The drugs were great. The personalities he was bringing about were real. Yeah. Gradually, we see that slip across the 50%. Now he thinks of himself as Jesus in reincarnation. Yeah. All of that is slipping towards total fantasy, isn't it?
It is, and we are starting in episode 8. We're starting to see the decline, and I suspect as we go forward into episode 9, we'll start to see a very quick decline into a bloodbath. From a criminal point of view and from an investigative point of view, I think there's going to be a lot to talk about. And Alex, well done again, and we'll see you next week.